At first, it seemed like nothing had changed. Kamsy welcomed Adaora with open arms, introducing her to her group of rich friends on campus. She invited Adaora to parties, took her shopping, and acted as if their friendship had never been broken. But beneath the surface, things were different. The sky was dark, heavy with rain clouds. As Ngozi Nwankwo drove through the busy streets of Onitsha, she had just closed from work and was eager to get home to her only daughter Adaora. The little girl had been waiting for her mother all day, excited to show her the new drawings she had made at school. Ngozi was a hardworking woman. After her husband passed away when Adaora was just a baby, she took on multiple jobs to provide for their small family. She worked as a small trading shop in Ochanja Market and took on extra work, cleaning offices in the evening. Life was not easy, but she did everything she could to make sure Adaora never lacked anything. That night, as she drove home, her phone rang. It was the owner of the shop where she worked. She hesitated before picking up, keeping one hand on the steering while holding the phone with the other. "Madam, please, I will settle the debt soon," Ngozi said, her voice filled with exhaustion. Just as she spoke, a truck appeared from nowhere, speeding recklessly down the road. In a split second, the truck crashed into her car with full force, sending it rolling over multiple times. People rushed to the scene, screaming in horror. By the time they pulled her out, Ngozi was lifeless. Back at home, Adaora sat on the floor, waiting. She had placed her mother's favorite food on the table, smiling as she imagined how proud her mother would be on her drawings. But as the hours passed, her excitement turned into worry. When the knock finally came at the door, it wasn't her mother. It was a group of people from their neighborhood, their faces filled with sorrow. That night, Adaora's world crumbled. After the burial, it became clear that there was no one to care for Adaora. Her father's relatives had abandoned her for long, and her mother's family were too poor to take her in. Finally, an old friend of her mother, Madam Rose Nwankwo, stepped forward and offered to take the girl in. Madam Rose lived in Enugu with her husband, Chukwudi Nwankwo, and their 2 children. They were not rich, but they had kind hearts. They welcomed Adaora into their home, treating her like one of their own. However, life in Enugu was not easy for Adaora. Though her foster parents were loving, their financial struggles meant that money was always tight. Madam Rose sold foodstuffs at the market, while her husband, a retired school teacher, barely earned enough for tutoring students. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment, where Adaora shared a room with the 2 daughters. There were days when there wasn't enough food for everyone, days when she had to wear the same worn-out shoes to school, yet she never complained. Instead, she worked hard, determined to make something of her life. From a young age, Adaora understood that education was her only ticket to a better future. She threw herself into her studies, waking up early to read before school and staying up late to complete her assignments. At school, she was known as one of the brightest students in her class. Her teachers often praised her, calling her the girl with a fire in her eyes. But not everyone was happy about her success. Some classmates mocked her for wearing old clothes, while others looked down on her for coming from a poor background. Despite everything, she never gave up. After years of hard work, she finally passed her final exams with distinction, earning admission to the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, UNN. It was the happiest day of her life. Her foster parents rejoiced, proud of how far she had come. But there was still a problem. How would they pay for her university fees? Madam Rose did her best. She did all she could, borrowing money and selling some of her goods to raise funds. With their support, Adaora left for Nsukka, determined to make her foster parents proud. University life was a fresh start for Adaora. She was eager to learn and she worked hard in all her courses. She avoided distractions, staying focused on her dreams. One day, while walking across campus, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Adaora, is that really you? She turned and came face to face with her childhood friend, Kamsy Okeke. Kamsy had been her closest friend during her early years in Onitsha before life took them in different directions. Unlike Adaora, Kamsy came from a wealthy family. Her father was a successful businessman and her mother was a well-known socialite. Kamsy had always been spoiled with the finest things, expensive clothes, fancy gadgets, and luxurious vacations. But as children, none of that mattered. They had been best friends, spending every day together, playing, laughing, and dreaming about the future. Now, years later, they had found each other again. At first, it seemed like nothing had changed. Kamsy welcomed Adaora with open arms, introducing her to her group of rich friends on campus. She invited Adaora to parties, took her shopping, and acted as if their friendship had never been broken. But beneath the surface, things were different. Kamsy still saw Adaora as the poor girl from their childhood. She looked down on Adora's struggle. Though she never said it openly, sometimes she would mock Adora's simple lifestyle, laughing about how she didn't own designer shoes or how she couldn't afford to eat at fancy restaurants. Adaora noticed the subtle insult, but ignored them. She reminded herself that she was in school for a purpose. She didn't have time for distractions, but Kamsy's attitude was a sign of things to come. As the semester progressed, Adaora worked harder than ever. She avoided unnecessary outings and focused on her studies. She knew that education was the only way to escape poverty. Meanwhile, Kamsy continued to enjoy her lavish lifestyle, spending money recklessly and partying every weekend. She had everything Adaora didn't: money, luxury, and social status. Yet, deep down, Kamsy envied Adora's intelligence and determination. She saw how respected Adaora was in school, how professors praised her for her brilliance, and despite everything, she felt overshadowed. Adaora had nothing. Yes, she was shining brighter than her. At first, Kamsy tried to ignore the feeling, but as time went on, that small jealousy would grow into something dangerous, something that would change both their lives forever. Years later, Kamsy's graduation day came. The sun was shining brighter over Nsukka as Adaora Nwankwo stepped onto the university stage, her heart pounding with excitement. She adjusted her graduation gown, feeling a mix of joy and nervousness. This was the moment she had been working toward for years. Her name was called, and she walked forward to receive her certificate. As she shook hands with the Vice Chancellor, she felt tears fill her eyes. She had made it. Her foster parents, Madam Rose and Chukwudi Nwankwo, sat in the audience, clapping with pride. They had sacrificed so much to see her through school. Adaora knew she owed them everything. As she stepped down from the stage, she looked around at her fellow graduates. Some were already making plans for further studies abroad, while others were discussing job opportunities. For Adaora, the next step was clear. She needed to find a job. A few weeks after graduation, Adaora packed her bags and boarded a bus to Lagos. The city was known as the land of opportunities, and she was determined to make something of herself. Her foster parents had scraped together some money to help her with her transportation and accommodation. She would be staying with her aunt, Nkechi, in Ojodubega, a bustling part of Lagos filled with both the rich and the struggling. Life in Lagos was different from Enugu. The streets were always busy, the air filled with the sounds of car horns, shouting traders, and music from nearby shops. The first few days were overwhelming, but Adaora reminded herself why she was there: to find a job and build a better life. She had applied to several banks and companies, sending out countless applications. When she received an invitation for an interview at Victory Trust Bank, she could hardly believe it. It was one of the biggest banks in Nigeria. This was her chance. On the morning of the interview, Adaora woke up early. She borrowed one of her auntie's blouses and ironed her only skirt. She polished her shoes, ensuring she looked neat and professional. As she entered the bank's headquarters in Victoria Island, she felt a wave of anxiety. The large glass doors, polished floors, and well-dressed employees made her realize just how far she had come from the dusty streets of Nsukka. She was one of 10 candidates waiting to be interviewed. Some were from rich families, wearing expensive suits and carrying designer handbags. They whispered among themselves, laughing about their connections in the industry. Adaora ignored them. She knew she had something they didn't: determination. When her name was called, she walked in confidently. The panel of interviewers sat before her, their faces serious. One of them, Mr. Femi Ajayi, the bank's head of operation, studied her CV. "You graduated with excellent grades," he said, tapping the paper. "But what makes you think you can survive in a competitive environment like this?" Adaora took a deep breath. "I believe in hard work, sir. I may not come from a wealthy background, but I have faced challenges that have made me strong. I know how to handle pressure, and I am willing to give my best." Another interviewer, Mrs. Osaro, leaned forward. "This job requires mobilizing funds and bringing in high net worth clients. How do you plan to achieve that?" Adaora thought for a moment before replying, "By building relationships, ma'am. People want to trust their bank. If they see honesty and commitment, they will be willing to invest. I may not have experience, but I am ready to learn." The panel exchanged glances. They had expected someone nervous, but Adaora spoke with confidence. After the interview, she walked out feeling uncertain. Had she done enough? Would they pick her over candidates from wealthier backgrounds? She didn't have to wait longer for an answer. 2 days later, she received a call from the bank. "Congratulations, Miss Wanko. You have been offered the position of a bank officer. Please report on Monday for your orientation." Adaora screamed in excitement. She had done it. On her first day at work, Adaora arrived early. The bank's office was impressive, with marble floors, high ceilings, and air conditioning that made the air crisp. She sat in a waiting area with other new employees, listening as a senior officer welcomed them. During the lunch break, she met someone who would later change her life: Desmond Eze. Desmond was a young but highly successful entrepreneur. He had built a business empire in Lagos, dealing in real estate and technology. Unlike many rich men, he was polite and humble. Adaora first noticed him when he walked into the bank with his assistant. He was tall, confident, and well-dressed. But what stood out was his focus. She was at the customer service desk when his assistant approached. "Mr. Eze would like to open a corporate account," the assistant said. Adaora smiled personally. "Of course. Do you have all the required documents?" Desmond, who had been checking his phone, looked up and met her eyes. There was a brief moment of silence. "You are new here," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. "Yes, sir," Adaora replied. "I started this week." Desmond nodded. "I like your confidence. Most people are nervous on their first day." Adaora smiled. "I believe in doing my best, sir." He handed her his documents, and as she processed them, he watched her closely. Something about her was different. She wasn't trying to impress him, yet she carried herself with dignity. By the time she finished, Desmond was intrigued. "I'll be coming here often," he said as he took his document. "I hope to see you around." Adaora simply nodded. "Thank you so much, sir. Have a very nice day." Meanwhile, in another part of Lagos, Kamsy sat in a beauty salon, scrolling through her phone. She had moved to Lagos after graduation, enjoying the luxurious lifestyle funded by her parents. She spent her days shopping, attending parties, and posting pictures on social media. She had never worked a day in her life, believing her father's money would always provide. As she checked Instagram, a picture caught her attention. It was Adaora, smiling in a crisp bank uniform, standing outside Victory Trust Bank. The caption read, "First day at work, hard work pays. Kamsy felt a wave of irritation. How did she get a job in that big bank? She muted. She had always seen Adaora as the poor girl from their childhood, someone who wasn't supposed to succeed. She quickly sent a message to Adaora. Wow, I just saw your post. Congratulations, dear. Thank you so much, Kamsy. I really appreciate. Adaora replied. But even as she typed, Kamsy's mind was filled with jealousy. She put down her phone and crossed her legs. Adaora thinks she can shine in Lagos. Kamsy wasn't going to let that happen. Adaora woke up early, dressed neatly in her Victory Trust Bank uniform, and stepped out into the busy streets of Victoria Island. It had been a week since she started working at the bank, and though she was grateful for the opportunity, she was beginning to feel the weight of the corporate world pressing down on her. Inside the bank's grand headquarters, employees moved briskly, attending to clients, discussing figures, and handling transactions. Everything looked organized and professional, but behind the polished walls was a world filled with competition, pressure, and silent battles for survival. Adaora was eager to prove herself. She had worked too hard to get here, and she refused to let anything discourage her. That morning, all new employees were called for a meeting with the head of operations, Mr. Femi Ajayi. He was a tall, middle-aged man with a sharp gaze and an intimidating presence. He was known for being strict, ambitious, and highly demanding. As the employees settled into their seats, Mr. Ajayi adjusted his tie and looked around the room. Welcome to the real world, he began. You are no longer students. You are now employees of one of the biggest banks in the country. We don't pay you to sit around. You must prove your worth. The room was silent. Each of you has been assigned targets. Your performance will determine if you remain here. He paused and glanced at Adaora before continuing. You have 6 months to mobilize 15 million. If you fail, consider yourself out of this bank. Adora's heart skipped a beat. 15 million naira in 6 months? She had expected challenges, but this was beyond difficult. How was she supposed to convince clients to deposit such a huge sum in such a short time? The other employees whispered among themselves, clearly worried. Some of you have connections, Mr. Ajayi continued. I advise you to use them. Those who can't meet their targets will be shown the door. Adaora swallowed hard. She had no rich relatives, no influential connections. All she had was her determination. As time goes on, Adaora threw herself into her work, determined to meet the bank's expectations. She cold called businesses, visited offices, and spoke to market women, trying to convince people to open accounts and deposit large amounts. Days after, she faced rejections. Some clients laughed in her face, telling her they only trusted established bankers. Others dismissed her without listening. She worked late into the night, making lists of potential clients, strategizing and refusing to give up. But her numbers remained low. A month into her target, she had only managed to raise 3 million naira, far from the 15 million naira goal. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk going through her files, Mr. Ajayi walked up to her. How much have you mobilized so far? He asked coldly. Adaora nervously replied, 3 million, sir. I am working on new strategies too. Before she could finish, Mr. Ajayi slammed a file on her desk. That's not good enough. I don't want excuses. I want results. If you don't meet your target, you are out of this bank. Employees turned to watch, some with pity, others with mocking smiles. Adaora clenched her fist under the table, refusing to let his words break her. I understand, sir. I will keep working. Mr. Ajayi narrowed his eyes, clearly doubting her ability to succeed. Without another word, he walked away. Adaora took a deep breath. She had come too far to let fear control her. She would find a way. Later that evening, as Adaora packed her bags to leave, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to see Kelvin Udo. a senior executive known for his charm and questionable morals. Kelvin was in his late 30s, always dressed in expensive suits, and had a reputation for helping female employees at a cost. "Miss Nwankwo," he said smoothly, "I hear you are struggling with your target." Adaora stiffened. "I'm working on it, sir." Kelvin smiled. "You're hardworking, but hard work alone won't help you survive here." Adaora remained silent, sensing something off. "You see, in this business, you need connections," he continued. "Rich men controls the money. And lucky for you, I know a few who would be happy to help a beautiful young lady like you." Adora's stomach turned. Kelvin leaned in slightly. "All you have to do is to be friendly. Meet them for drinks, spend time with them. They will deposit millions into your account." Adaora stared at him in shock. This was not what she signed up for. She had worked too hard to trade her integrity for success. With a steady voice, she replied, "Thank you for the advice, sir, but I will achieve my target my own way." Kelvin's smile faded. He studied her, then smiled. "You are proud, aren't you?" he said. "Let me tell you something for free. Many before you tried to play the honest girl. They all left this bank empty-handed." Adaora met his gaze. "Then, I will be the first to succeed the right way." Kelvin laughed and shook his head. "Let's see how long you last," he said before walking away. Adaora took a deep breath, gripping her bag tightly. She refused to be corrupted. She would meet her target with integrity or not at all. As Adaora left the office, she felt exhausted but not defeated. She boarded a bus home, staring out the window, deep in thought. There has to be a way. She pulled out her notebook and began listing every strategy she hadn't tried yet. She would talk to more business owners. She would attend networking events. She would find new ways to market the bank's services. Failure was not an option. As the bus rumbled through the streets of Lagos, Adaora made a promise to herself. She would prove Mr. Ajayi, Kelvin Udo, and everyone who doubted her wrong. She would rise on her own terms. The next day, she woke up feeling exhausted but determined. The past few weeks had been the toughest of her life. She had spoken to dozens of business owners, sent out countless proposals, and attended every networking event she could find. Yet, her target still seemed impossible to reach. At Victory Trust Bank, the pressure was increasing. Every morning, her boss, Mr. Ajayi, would remind them of their targets, making it clear that failure was not an option. But Adaora refused to give up. She had one more plan. That morning, as Adaora walked into the bank, she noticed a familiar face in the waiting area. Desmond Eze. Desmond was one of the wealthiest young businessmen in Lagos. He had several investments, from real estate to 10 startups, and was known for his strategic thinking and business acumen. Adaora had met him once before when he came to open an account. Since then, he had returned to bank several times, always making polite conversations. This time, when he saw her, he stood up and walked toward her. "Adaora, busy as always," he said. She smiled back, "Trying my best, sir." "Desmond," he corrected. "No need for formalities." She nodded, still slightly nervous around him. "I've been watching how you handle your work," Desmond said. "You're different from most bankers I've met. You don't push people unnecessarily. You try to build real relationships." Adaora was surprised. She didn't think someone as influential as Desmond would notice her efforts. "I respect that," he continued, "which is why I would like to introduce you to a few business associates. They might be interested in opening accounts with your bank." Adaora froze for a moment. This was the kind of opportunity she had been praying for. "Thank you, sir. Desmond," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I truly appreciate this. I appreciate." Desmond smiled. "Let's see how it goes. We will talk soon." As he walked away, Adaora felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was her breakthrough. That evening, Kamsy Okeke sat in her luxurious apartment, scrolling through her phone. She had been keeping an eye on Adora's social media posts. Every time she saw something about her job, it annoyed her. Now, she saw a comment under one of Adora's posts. Desmond Eze, keep up the good work there. Kamsy sat up immediately. Desmond? The same wealthy, influential businessman she had been trying to attract for months? She couldn't believe it. She had met Desmond at an event some time ago, but he had never paid her much attention. Now, he was commenting on Adora's posts. Anger boiled inside her. What does Adora have that I don't? She picked up her phone and called Adora. Hey bestie. Kamsy's voice was fake sweet. Adora, unaware of her friend's true feelings, smiled as she answered. Kamsy, it's been a while. How are you? I'm good, my dear. I saw your post. Look like you're doing well at work. Adora sighed. It's tough, but I'm trying my best. Kamsy pretended to be supportive, but deep down, she was furious. Well, I'm proud of you, Kamsy said. By the way, I met someone interesting today. Guess who? Who? Desmond Eze. Adora blinked in surprise. You know Desmond? Kamsy laughed lightly. Of course, we met at an event some time ago. He's such a charming man. Oh, that's nice, Adora said, not thinking much of it. But Kamsy had a plan brewing in her mind. Desmond is mine. I will make sure Adora doesn't take him away from me. The next day, Kamsy put her plan into action. She dressed in her most expensive outfit, styled her hair perfectly, and went to one of the exclusive clubs in Victoria Island, knowing Desmond would be there for a business meeting. When she spotted him sitting with some associates, she walked over with confidence. Desmond, she greeted, flashing her best smile. Desmond looked up, surprised to see her. Kamsy, right? Yes, she said, sitting down beside him without waiting for an invitation. We met at that charity gala last year. He nodded politely. That's right. How have you been? Oh, I've been great, she said, placing a hand on his arm. I was hoping we could catch up sometime, maybe dinner. Desmond immediately understood her intentions. He had met many women like Kamsy, wealthy, entitled, and used to getting what they wanted, but he wasn't interested. I appreciate the invite, he said, gently removing her hand, but I have a busy schedule. Kamsy laughed awkwardly, pretending not to be offended. Busy with work? She asked, or busy with someone? Desmond smiled. Work mostly. Kamsy leaned forward. Well, if you ever need to relax, I'm always available. Desmond sipped his drink and changed the topic. He had no interest in Kamsy. He had seen her type before, beautiful on the outside, but shallow and self-centered. After a few more minutes, he excused himself and left. As Kamsy watched him walk away, anger burned inside her. Adora must have done something to turn him against me. Meanwhile, Adora remained unaware of everything happening behind her back. She was focused on work, preparing for the networking event Desmond had invited her to. Kamsy called her again that evening, still pretending to be supportive. How is work, baby? Kamsy sounded sweetly, though Adora admitted, but Desmond is introducing me to some business associates. Hopefully, I will get new clients. Kamsy clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. Wow, that's amazing, she said. You're lucky to have him helping you. Adora smiled. Yes, he's really kind. Kamsy said. Be careful though. Men like him always expect something in return. Adora laughed lightly. I don't think Desmond is like that. Kamsy sighed dramatically. I hope so. Just don't trust him too much. Adora didn't suspect anything. To her, Kamsy was still her best friend. She had no idea that the person she trusted the most was the same person trying to bring her down. The pressure at Victory Trust Bank was reaching its peak. Every day, Adora walked into the office feeling the weight of expectation crushing her. The deadline for meeting her target was fast approaching, and despite her hard work, she was still far from the 50 million naira goal. She had met with countless business owners, attended networking events, and followed every strategy she could think of. Yet, most clients were hesitant to trust a new banker with large deposits. The stress was overwhelming, but Adaora refused to give up. She needed this job. That morning, as Adaora settled at her desk, she heard the dreaded voice of Mr. Femi Ajayi, the head of operations. All bank officers, gather in the conference room now, he ordered. Adaora swallowed hard, already expecting bad news. She walked into the room where all her colleagues sat, waiting nervously. Mr. Ajayi stood at the front, holding a report in his hand. His face was stern, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for prey. I hope you all understand that this bank does not tolerate failure. He began. Targets were given, and some of you are not performing. He flipped through the report. Adaora Nwankwo, he called. Adora's heart stopped for a second. Slowly, she stood up, feeling the eyes of her colleagues on her. Mr. Ajayi looked straight at her. Do you know how much you have mobilized? Adaora nodded nervously. Yes, sir. 12 million naira so far. A cold silence filled the room. Then Mr. Ajayi laughed mockingly. 12 million naira, he repeated. In nearly 5 months. What have you been doing? Adora's face burned with shame. Her colleagues whispered among themselves, some giggling quietly. You were hired to bring in 50 million naira, not struggling like market trader. Mr. Ajayi continued. If you can't do that job, maybe you should leave. I think you should leave. Adaora felt her throat tighten. She wanted to defend herself, to explain how hard she had been working, how many sleepless nights she had spent trying to find solutions, but she knew it wouldn't matter. In Mr. Ajayi's eyes, she was just another employee who was failing. Consider this your final warning, he said. If you don't meet your target by the deadline, you are finished. With that, he dismissed the meeting. Adaora slowly walked back to her desk, trying to hold back the tears tinging her eyes. That afternoon, Kamsy sat in a fancy restaurant sipping orange juice as she gossiped with two of Adora's colleagues from the bank. Have you heard? She said, pretending to be concerned. The two women leaned in eagerly. What happened? Kamsy lowered her voice, making sure to sound convincing. I feel bad for Adaora, she began. She's really struggling at work. One of the ladies nodded. Yes, Mr. Ajayi embarrassed her in front of everyone today. Kamsy sighed dramatically. It's not just that. I heard she's been seeing some rich men, hoping they will help her meet her target. The women gasped. Are you serious? Kamsy nodded, her expression serious. I don't want to judge, but I saw her with an older man last weekend, she said, lying honestly and smoothly. She was dressed all fancy, laughing with him. She looked really close to him. One of the ladies shook her head in disbelief. So after all her preaching about hard work, she's still looking for shortcuts? Kamsy shrugged, pretending to be innocent. I don't know, she said. I just hope she's not compromising herself. By the next morning, rumors had spread like wildfire. In the office, whispered followed Adaora wherever she went. Some colleagues mic'd behind her back, others looked at her with judgment. She noticed the strange glances, but she had no idea why. By the end of the week, Mr. Ajayi called Adaora into his office. She walked in, standing before his desk, bracing herself for another round of criticism. Mr. Ajayi leaned back in his chair, studying her. I've been hearing things, he said. Adaora frowned in confusion. Sir? He folded his arms. Some of your colleagues say you've been spending time with wealthy men outside work. Are you using unusual methods to meet your target? Adora's eyes widened in shock. Sir, that's not true, she said quickly. I would never do such a thing. Mr. Ajayi tapped his fingers on the desk, watching her closely. I don't care what you do outside this office, he said, but if you bring problems to my bank, you will regret it. Adaora felt anger boiling inside her. She had worked so hard, and now, because of some ridiculous rumor, her boss was questioning her integrity. I don't have connections, sir, she said firmly. I am doing my best, and I will meet my target with honesty. Mr. Ajayi chuckled coldly. Let's be realistic, Miss Nwankwo, he said. You have 1 month left. 12 million naira in 5 months? Do you think you can suddenly raise the remaining 38 million naira? Adaora stayed silent. Exactly, he continued. You are running out of time. If you don't bring results soon, you will be out of this bank. He dismissed her with a wave of hand. Adaora walked out of his office, feeling frustrated and betrayed. Who had spread such lies about her? She had always been careful. She had never done anything inappropriate. She had only trusted one person, and that is her friend Kamsy. But she refused to believe her best friend would do something like this. Or would she? That night, Adaora sat in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. She had 1 month left to reach an impossible target. She had lost the respect of her colleagues because of false rumor. Her boss had already decided she would fail. Her future was slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. But one thing was certain, she would not give up. She had faced struggles her entire life. She had survived losing her mother. She had overcome poverty. She would fight till the very end. Early the next morning, the sun had barely risen when Adaora left her small apartment, heading for Victory Trust Bank. She had spent another sleepless night, strategizing, making calls, and preparing new client proposals. The pressure at work was unbearable, but she refused to let failure define her. She had 1 month left to meet her 50 million naira target, and the weight of expectation was suffocating. Her boss, Mr. Femi Ajayi, had already humiliated her in front of her colleagues. Rumors were spreading about her personal life. Every day, she walked into the office feeling like an outsider. But today, she had hope. Desmond Eze, the wealthy businessman who had shown interest in her professionalism, had offered to introduce her to potential investors. And if this went well, this could be her breakthrough. By midday, Adaora was sitting in one of Lagos' finest restaurants, waiting anxiously. Desmond had arranged a private meeting with some top investors and business moguls who were looking for banking solutions. When Desmond arrived, he smiled at her. Nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. Don't be, he assured her. You've earned this. Within minutes, 3 high-profile investors joined them. They exchanged pleasantries before getting down to business. Adaora spoke with confidence, explaining how Victory Trust Bank could help manage their finances, maximize returns, and provide exclusive banking benefits. The investors listened attentively, impressed by her knowledge, passion, and honesty. After an hour of discussion, 2 of the men agreed to open accounts, each depositing 15 million naira immediately. Adaora could barely believe it. 30 million naira secured in one day. When the investors left, Desmond smiled at her. You did it, he said. I told you you had something special. Adaora felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Desmond, she whispered. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to, he replied. Just keep proving them wrong. For the first time in months, Adaora felt hope return to her heart. She was now only 8 million naira away from her target. Victory was within reach. While Adaora was celebrating her success, Kamsy Okeke was sitting with jealousy. She had tried everything, spreading rumors, belittling Adaora, and even seducing Desmond, but nothing had worked. Instead of falling apart, Adaora was rising. Her name was now being mentioned in high places. Her hard work was paying off. Desmond admired her even more. It was unbearable. Kamsy had to stop her. That evening, Kamsy sat in her car, thinking. Then an idea came to her. Something that would destroy Adaora completely. What if she was accused of fraud? At Victory Trust Bank, security was tight, but Kamsy had connections. She knew a junior IT officer who owed her a favor. That night, she made a secret call. I need something done, she whispered. Anything for you, Kamsy. The man replied, what is it? I need fake proof that Adaora is involved in fraudulent transactions. I want it to look like she had been stealing from clients. The man hesitated. That's serious. Can you do it or not? She snapped. After a pause, he said, consider it done. Kamsy smiled wickedly. By tomorrow, Adaora would be finished. I can't wait, she said. The next morning, Adaora walked into the office with renewed confidence. She had secured 30 million and she was determined to close the remaining 8 million before the deadline. As she settled at her desk, she noticed that everyone was staring at her. She frowned. What were they whispering?